So usually when I critique a YouTuber, I do a lot of background research. That's not true this time. The truth is that I really wanted to talk about the money that Congress restored to the IRS last week and what an amazing development this is. But I want people to actually watch the video, so I had to throw in some YouTube drama. So I watched my first ever video from a guy named Steven Crowder. Now, I've never heard anything good about Steven Crowder, but maybe that's unfair. Let's see.
So this includes $80 billion, this bill, in new funding for the IRS to help inflation.
Yes.
To help inflation. By the way, do you know what their budget is annually?
The IRS?
$12.5 billion. They're getting $80 billion in this bill.
That's a lot of nuts.
That's insane.
Why don't we just take that Ukraine money
Good one,
back?
Yakuza.
That's like 6 to 7 times their annual budget now. Are you kidding me?
Yes, this is now going to be known as new IRS.
Yes.
That right there is bullshit. And it's not even crazy conservative BS. It's mainstream media BS. That's what a lot of this Crowder video is. It's standard New York Times opinion page ideas, just served up with a transgressive thrill of middle-aged men picking on college students. The Hillary Clinton standard propaganda they are engaging in here is the old Washington, D.C. trick of reporting all money spent by the government in 1-year intervals to make it seem smaller if it's for weapons, and in 10-year intervals to make it seem bigger for absolutely everything else. No, the IRS is not getting an $80 billion check. They're getting $8 billion a year for 10 years. That's 1/100th of what the Pentagon's getting this year. Now that may still seem like a big number. Why would the IRS need to go from $12 billion a year in funding to $20 billion a year in funding? Well, what's needed here is a little history lesson that Crowder and his cronies have no interest in providing. You see, 12 years ago, all the way back in 2010, the IRS had $14 billion a year in funding. And 12 years later, they have almost $2 billion less to work with. Why don't we compare that with Medicare, another government program? Well, in 2010, Medicare spent $516 billion. And in 2022, Medicare is expected to spend $829 billion. That Medicare number is higher than it should be, but it is natural for these numbers to go up. Inflation happens every year. The amount of money we spend on every agency goes up every year. Except with the IRS. The tax police, the Internal Revenue Service, has been systematically defunded for over 10 years now. That was a huge problem and a serious danger to our country that the Democrats have just acted to fix. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about Steven Crowder's philosophy. He was kind enough to lay it out in his IRS video, and it is very, very mainstream media.
But here's the problem again with class warfare. I've known some of the most generous people that I've ever known are wealthy people. Some of the most selfish people I've known are poor people. I've also known some really generous middle-class people.
Yeah.
I will tell you this, I've never known any really, really generous poor people. That's just anecdotal. And I've known some selfish rich people. But he says, rich people cheating on their taxes. If they're cheating on their taxes, and by the way, everyone technically cheats on their taxes, that's why you have the IRS and you just octupled their funding. What about poor people who cheat on their taxes? What about the baby mama situation? What about people who specifically underdeclare income or don't work so that they can get more EBT card benefits, so that they can get more social safety net benefits? That's a cheat as well.
So rich people are good and poor people are bad. It's rarely talked about this explicitly, so I guess we should be grateful to Crowder for just putting it out there. But this is not a transgressive right-wing take. In fact, it's been the guiding philosophy of the US government for the past 42 years. It's not just a Reaganite idea, it is the basis of the Clinton family's ideology as well. I'll spare you another repeat of an old clip on this, but I've been talking about the declining Reagan era for 2 years now. In 1980, with the election of Ronald Reagan, the United States moved away from the old FDR New Deal idea that the government had to interfere in the economy to bring about economic justice. That system had broken down in the 1970s, and now it was time for big business to save us. Rich entrepreneurs would beat communism at home and abroad and make the United States the world leader in wealth and technology again. For the past 42 years, no politician, Republican or Democratic, has been able to escape this ideology, and with good reason. For the first 2 decades or so, it worked amazingly well. Clinton and Obama both governed according to these Reaganite principles. Actually, Clinton and Obama may have been better Reaganites than the Republican presidents. You see, Ronald Reagan himself was often blocked from making the reforms he wanted to. First, by the economic crises that his initial reforms caused, the Volcker shock and the S&L crisis, and also by the old-school New Deal Democratic Congress that held power throughout Reagan's time in office. The best president for Steven Crowder's poor people bad, rich people good philosophy was probably Bill Clinton. Let's look at Clinton's 3 biggest legacies. The first was welfare reform. The idea that those who were unfortunate enough to need government assistance had to be punished and forced to work, because poor people are bad. The next was the idea that the era of big government was over and that private sector contractors should do progressively more and more of the work that used to be done by government bureaucrats. This led to the horrific overspending of the war on terror and worldwide mercenary armies, but back in the 1990s, we didn't know that. The third Clintonite legacy was massive financial deregulation. Most famously, the repeal of Glass-Steagall, but made up of dozens of other deregulatory gifts to Wall Street as well. The idea was that rich people were fundamentally good and that they should be allowed to do whatever they wanted. This led to catastrophe in 2008, but it created great economic success in the 1990s. If he were honest, Steven Crowder would probably have to admit that Bill Clinton is his favorite president. And Barack Obama would probably be his second favorite. Barack Obama's biggest reform was the supposedly socialist Obamacare. If you look in the details, though, it becomes clear that Obamacare was massively, obscenely good for business. The reform was initially cooked up at the Heritage Foundation, a right-wing think tank. It did include some good things: the end of discrimination based on pre-existing conditions and the end of insurance companies imposing maximums on coverage, which would cut people off who were experiencing traumatic health conditions after a certain dollar limit was reached. Obamacare did extend health coverage a little bit. But does anybody think Big Pharma or the insurance industry lost a single penny of profit to Obamacare? Of course not. Obama helped to make the U.S. healthcare industry one of the wealthiest and most profitable industries in human history. Obama's second biggest legacy? Well, that was probably the systematic gutting of the U.S. Internal Revenue Service between 2010 and 2022. The best chronicler of this destruction is probably ProPublica, that essential journalism nonprofit. They have done amazing, invaluable work on this somewhat boring technical topic. But I disagree with the tone of some of their coverage. Beyond the brilliant technical detail, they play into the same myth that Steven Crowder loves to put forward. The myth that the Republicans and Democrats disagree on much that's fundamental, other than guns and abortion. ProPublica loves to blame the Republicans for the destruction of the IRS, but let's not forget that Obama was the president when this happened, and he signed all the relevant legislation. Democrats supported this disaster as well. In recent weeks, we've gotten a strong reminder of how much Democrats love giving money to rich people. The Inflation Reduction Act, the legislation we're talking about today, initially included language that closed the carried interest loophole for private equity. This loophole, that everybody from Donald Trump to AOC has condemned, exclusively benefits a few dozen of the richest people in the country. Who saved the loophole? Arizona Democrat Kyrsten Sinema. That's who. So let's dispense with the idea that the Republicans were the only bad guys here. Both parties were complicit in the destruction of the IRS. It was an action that was completely in keeping with the guiding philosophy of the past 42 years. Rich people good, poor people bad. ProPublica lays out how massive the destruction was with simple statistics. As IRS staffing has fallen, so has its ability to collect money. Annual revenue from audits has fallen by $10 billion since 2010. Every year, a certain amount of tax debts lapse because the IRS fails to pursue them before the statute of limitations expires. In 2010, the annual figure was $482 million. In 2017, after the budget cuts, that figure was $8.3 billion. And this is just the stuff that we know for sure that the IRS is no longer catching. To make the fall in funding even more cataclysmic, over the past decade, the IRS has been asked to take on two new massive regulatory burdens: the rollout of Obamacare and the overhaul of the tax code required by the Trump tax cuts. Not only has the IRS been starved of the funds necessary to do its main job, it's been asked to do multiple new jobs as well.
If they're cheating on their taxes, and by the way, everyone technically cheats on their taxes, that's why you have the IRS.
Everyone technically cheats on their taxes, that's why you have the IRS. That's why you have the IRS.
Well, before last week's legislation, we didn't really have an IRS at all anymore. Back in 2020, I had an issue with the IRS, and I had to deal with it in writing, so I wrote them a letter. They responded to me 8 months later. And I'm somebody who wanted to keep up with my tax obligations. What about the millions of people in this country who choose not to file a tax return at all?
Everyone technically cheats on their taxes, that's why you have the IRS.
Turns out ProPublica has data on this as well. In 2011, the IRS went after 2.4 million people for not bothering to file a tax return. In 2017, they only had the money to go after 362,000 non-filers. And the worst aspect of all this is that going after wealthy tax cheats is complex, boutique stuff requiring difficult investigation and litigation. You need a well-paid staff to do this. The IRS used to be pretty good at it, but they can't afford it anymore, so now they are mostly going after the poor and the easily intimidated low-value tax cheats.
Well, the problem is usually only the people with the best accountants and the best lawyers know how to take advantage of them.
Exactly.
People like you and me and, Gerald, dolts. We don't.
Crowder and his dolts are describing something that's always true. Rich people will always have more resources they can use to try to fool the tax man. But what Crowder is leaving out is that the situation over the past 10 years has made things much, much worse. The answer to rich people cheating on their taxes is not to entirely disarm the IRS. But that's exactly what we've done over the past decade. And it's not just the IRS. Defunding the tax police is just one aspect of the situation we have created over 42 years of government under the mantra that rich people are good and poor people are bad. We have constructed a country that is a paradise for the top 20% or so, but is becoming a dystopia for everybody else. Our dishwashers, phones, and TV habits are cheaper and more useful now, but housing, healthcare, and education all cost insanely more than they did 40 years ago. This isn't a problem for the top 20% that has profited immensely from the Reagan era, but it's a problem for everybody else. All three of the past 3 US presidents have promised to change this situation, but until last week, all 3 had largely failed. Most of what I've seen over the 14 years since the financial crisis is the rich getting richer and getting better at using the system for the benefit of the rich. We're becoming a desperately unequal country with falling social mobility where rich people don't even have to pay taxes anymore. In 2009, the world watched on in horror as the economy and society of Greece fell apart. A culture of cheating the government and celebrating that cheating led to a disaster they still haven't recovered from. I believe that Germany and the rest of Europe have been needlessly cruel in allowing Greece's economic depression to continue this long. But when the Northerners ask why they should bail out a country where nobody pays their taxes, it's a hard question to answer. Now, the United States is nowhere near Greece's predicament, though we are heading in that direction. we still have incredible wealth, a trust-based society, and strong institutions that go back centuries. But over the past 42 years, we've been sliding further and further away from trust, virtue, and the rule of law. I was beginning to think that that slide was becoming irreversible. Until last week, when Congress nearly miraculously decided to restore funding for the Internal Revenue Service. Before I close, I think I should say a bit more about Steven Crowder. The video I watched is filled with plenty of misrepresentations and outright lies on subjects from Palestine to gun deaths that I could talk about for hours. But that would be a waste of time. Instead, let's talk about something he got absolutely right.
So they say it'll only affect the richest Americans. Here's the truth. This bill is actually, and it's worse than accidental, it's designed to go after the middle class. It's designed to go after you. Here's why. You won't get enough if you just tax the ultra wealthy, and the mechanisms aren't in place. It's a constant arms race, right? They can hire better CPAs. They can hire lawyers. Even if they weren't able to, you wouldn't be able to get the kind of revenue that you need. So it's designed to come after the middle class, upper, let's call it upper middle class as well, small business owners.
This is true. When Biden or some other Democrat tells you or implies that only billionaires are going to be forced to honor their tax obligations going forward, they are lying to you. To truly get this country back on track, we're going to need sacrifices, not just from the 1%, but from the top 20% as well. However, Steven Crowder's definition of middle class is a bit slippery, as you can see from the clip we just watched and the clip we're about to watch.
The CPA, we have a third-party CPA who works for us, okay? As soon as the tax cuts came into play from Donald Trump, he hired 2 new people. He ended up hiring 4 new people throughout the term of Donald Trump. Now, the revenue from this place could be a few $1 million. That's the gross revenue. Okay, gross revenue. Let's say it's $5 million, okay? Taxes, cut that down to $3 million, okay? Payroll, just payroll, $2 million. Now you have $1 million left before the owner of this business takes any kind of money himself. What are the expenses? He could end up with $250,000. Now, that's good money. You should be grateful for it, but certainly not the top 1%. And that's most businesses throughout the United States.
He's talking about the owner of a business that employs at least a dozen people and clears a solid $250,000 worth of pure profit after taxes every year. This is Steven Crowder's definition of the middle class. This is the kind of small business that Crowder and the Republicans want to set free to cheat on their taxes. When anti-tax forces say middle class or small business, they want you to think of your aunt's plumbing business or your uncle's Etsy shop. What they really mean are businesses like the one that Crowder just described, the legions of consulting businesses, car dealerships, lawyers, accountants, and other professionals who have used the past decade without IRS scrutiny to get out of paying any taxes at all on multi-million-dollar revenues. Keep Crowder's example in mind whenever you hear the words small business in the future. I believe it's time to get away from the ideology that poor people are bad and rich people are fundamentally good. Pundits like Crowder pretend that this country's politics are deeply divided, but 1 hour of his content makes it pretty clear that our policy elites and our successful media figures like Steven Crowder are pretty united in following this central ideology. Some of the most generous people that Crowder knows are rich people. Hillary Clinton probably felt the same way when she was cashing all those checks from the world's biggest banks. Steven Crowder may claim to hate Hillary Clinton, but on all the ideological issues that truly matter, Steven Crowder is Hillary Clinton. Giving another $8 billion a year to the IRS isn't going to solve everything. Far from it. But what it is a sign. It's a sign that the United States is capable of making at least one of the changes we needed to make to get back on the path to prosperity. Being a country where people are expected to pay the taxes they owe is a pretty low bar. But last week, the United States decided to meet that standard for the first time in over a decade. I, for one, am pretty happy about that. Gives me hope. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to click the bell next to the subscribe button if you want to get a notification whenever I upload a new video. Thanks.